Amazing that when I put it on my blog that I was coming here, I had several serious journalists from well-known newspapers and news organisations call me. They wondered if I'd be let in. They were concerned for my safety. The most recent was at 17:43 this evening, from a journalist I know, said, "Hope you're safe over there." Did I, they asked, think I could trust the authorities? I was astonished by their line of reasoning. I know I've been critical of Jersey, but it seems that the perception of your island in the popular and even highbrow press is much worse than you can imagine. And I assured all inquirers, including my wife, that I was not concerned for my safety, well-being or security, and that I did not expect the Jersey authorities to take untoward action towards someone who's done a very few simple things, some of which have led me to talk about, write about, and broadcast about this great island on which you live. Let me remind you what those things that I've done are. Because in essence, I've done just three things. The first thing I've done is call for a massive increase in the transparency of the world's financial system. The second thing I said is that we should stop tax haven activity. And the third thing that I've been talking about has been the concept of tax compliance, where people and corporations seek to pay the right amount of tax in the right place at the right time. Now, I found it amazing, and I still do find it amazing, that calling for three things which seem to me to be so obviously right has given rise to such significant opposition. But I want to deal with those issues and why they're of such importance to Jersey and what I'm talking about tonight. I don't think there's any doubt at all that opacity, the lack of transparency within the world's financial system, helped create the financial collapse around the world in 2008. I know that a great many people say tax havens had nothing to do with that collapse. And to some degree, I have to be honest, they're right. As I've argued in my book, selfless plug, a book on tax havens, does what it says on the cover. As I've argued, nothing really happens in tax havens or in the offshore world. The whole of the offshore world is, to some degree, a giant pretense. If that's the case, then of course the world financial crisis did not happen offshore, because nothing happens offshore. But of course that's not the whole story. What was happening onshore was hidden through offshore. It's not chance that Northern Rock had serious operations in the Channel Islands. And it's not chance that one of the biggest funds here in Jersey was run by HBOS, which failed so spectacularly, and of course nearly brought Lloyds down with it, which is why Lloyds is now partly under UK state control. The opacity in those funds helped to create the world financial crisis, because people could pretend for too long that all was well when it was not. And we've all paid the price for that around the world. And indeed, we're still paying the price for opacity. Now, let me be clear. I don't know anyone who argues that individuals should have to undertake all their transactions under the blaze of publicity. I'm not asking for people's bank accounts to be on public record. So let's get the nonsense out of the way. People are entitled to reasonable privacy. Of course they are, if they undertake transactions in their own names and are personally accountable for their consequences. But when people choose to use companies, some forms of partnership, trusts and other arrangements to undertake transactions using privileges granted to them by parliaments, so that they are to varying degrees unaccountable for the consequence of their transactions, then the price that I and others argue that they should pay for this privilege is that they be openly and honestly accountable for the use they make of that privilege, such as limited liability. A privilege that societies grant to them, but for which they require accountability to make sure that no one inadvertently suffers as a consequence. Now, Jersey and a great many of the tax havens of the world, and let me be unambiguous, Jersey is a tax haven, and there's no point pretending otherwise. Jersey and other tax havens have gone out of their way to abuse this principle of openness, honesty and accountability by those who take advantage of the privileges granted to them by society. And when I say granted to them by society, too often that society, of course, is not Jersey society. It is society in which these people who use your facilities really live. But there is an extraordinary characteristic of all tax havens, and that is that they go out of their way to provide secrecy for those who make use of their services, almost all of whom, of course, actually live somewhere else. That's the definition of offshore. You're providing services to people who are somewhere else. But it's that secrecy which also means that we call tax havens secrecy jurisdictions, because it's the secrecy that lets everything else happen. What Jersey and other tax havens are doing is making sure they create regulation for the benefit of people who don't live here, which let those people who live somewhere else in the world avoid their obligations to the societies in which they really live. That's the basis of your industry. And those people can get away with this because you also and deliberately create that veil of secrecy here in Jersey, and of course in other tax havens as well, that prevents the authorities in the places where those people really live from identifying the fact that they're using your services. Now, historically, that abuse was designed to facilitate tax evasion. No one that I know now pretends that this wasn't the case. People from this island comment on my blog when I talk about tax evasion, and they say, when I do, that I'm talking about something that took place here in deepest, darkest history. That was called the 1990s. And I've got no doubt at all that in the 1990s there was tax evasion in Jersey. None whatsoever, because people tell me that's what happened. But my response to the people who tell me it happened then is a simple one. How do I know tax evasion has stopped when the secrecy that let it happen continues? That is the question. How do I know tax evasion has stopped when at least 50% of all the personal bank accounts maintained by people not resident in this island in branches in St Helier do not disclose the income earned on those accounts voluntarily to their domestic tax authorities under the EU Savings Tax Directive? How do I know tax evasion has stopped when, despite the fact that you have signed some tax information exchange agreements, the OECD has said, and I put the information on my blog and they got upset about it, but they've said you have almost no practical experience of exchanging tax information, a fact which was confirmed by my correspondence with Colin Powell last year, which some of you may have read. How do I know it has stopped when you still refuse automatic information exchange under the European Savings Tax Directive, a directive which exists for one reason and one reason only, and that is to stop tax evasion? And how do I know it stopped when I still cannot find out who owns a Jersey company, cannot find out who the nominee directors are really acting for, and can never see the accounts of that company. This secrecy is pernicious. You can tell me Jersey doesn't want tax evaders' money in the island, but your bank's behaviour does not confirm that. You can say you are transparent, but when I cannot find out anything that goes on in the Jersey company, meaning anyone who trades with it is at increased risk, I cannot believe you. And you can say that you have the best reputation in the world, and you do, but because it is hidden behind a veil of secrecy that is deliberately impermeable, because your government ensures that is the case, how do I really know that is true? And perhaps to me, most importantly, how do I know that illicit financial flows, the sort of illicit flows that Christian Aid thinks causes the deaths of thousands of children in Africa each year, because money flows out of that continent into Western banks and on into London through tax havens? How do I know those flows aren't coming through this island? How can I know? That is my question, because we know they're flowing somewhere. Finance can, of course, say, take my word for it. And I could have done that in the 1990s. And then I'd have found that there was really tax evasion going on. I don't think take my word for it is now enough. I'm afraid to say I think finance has moved beyond the stage where we say, take my word for it is good enough. I need to see you're being compliant. And that means you have to be transparent. Now, of course, I'm not saying it's just Jersey who needs to reform. Don't get me wrong. So does Guernsey. So does the Isle of Man. So does the Cayman Islands. So does Monaco. And so, let's be quite clear about this, does the UK with regard to some issues, and even more so does the USA. It isn't chance that the Tax Justice Network named the USA as the #1 secrecy jurisdiction in the world. So you're not alone. We're asking all these places to be more open, more honest and more accountable for varying and different reasons. It's what the world is demanding. When the Mail on Sunday demands it, as it did yesterday in an article, you really do think that perhaps things are moving just a little bit in this direction. I was amused to note this morning that an American website called the Mail on Sunday a left-wing statist newspaper. I'm sure that they're intrigued to discover that that's the US view of the Mail on Sunday. But if this doesn't happen, it's the whole market economy that's going to be dragged down and destroyed by the secrecy, by the mistrust, the chaos and corruption that is caused by tax havens. That's the real risk. Because remember that all economists agree, there's none who disagree with this, as far as I know, that markets can only deliver the best solutions for the people of the world if there is openness, honesty and accountability. If there is, in other words, free access to information on which people can make informed decisions about economic activity. That's what I want. I'm asking for the very, very basic rubric, which is the building block of market economies. That's why when I argue for this, I'm the friend of free markets in this debate. It's the offshore finance industry that is the enemy of the free market in this debate. It's the force that threatens to destroy the market system like a cancer eating away inside it, waiting at any moment to bring it down, as it almost did in 2008. So you have a problem. A problem because you are threatening Western market-based capitalism. Now, I agree it's not a problem made by Jersey alone, but you heard what the press said to me before I came. They think you've got a problem on this issue, and they're right. You've got a tax problem too. The fact is that the EU has now said you are not compliant with the EU Code of Conduct. As Ted said, I did, when working with him and a shadow scrutiny committee here in 2005, warn that this was the case. It seemed to me glaringly obvious that 010 would not pass the test that the EU had laid out. Jersey wanted to ignore what I said then. And I suspect that many in the Jersey establishment will want to ignore the message Europe and ministers from the UK have delivered now. But it's clear, and it's unambiguous. They say you are running an unfair tax system that is unacceptable to Europe, and they have told the UK they have to make you change it. That's their message. They say you're running a tax system designed to help those who do not live here to not pay tax. And they say it's unfair because the EU says that whilst your government is helping people who don't live here avoid tax, they're making those of you who live here pay more tax. Look whose side Europe is on. It's on the side of the people of Jersey. They're not a threat to you. They're trying to save you from the mess you're in. Your politicians, well, most of them, won't be saying that, because they're seeking to penalise you for living in Jersey. And the EU is saying it's wrong that you're forced to pay when others aren't. And they're saying the fact that you're paying when others aren't is deliberate. It's a choice that your politicians have made. And they're saying that choice is not acceptable to them. Or to put it another way, they're saying that despite all the protestations they've heard from your politicians, you are as much a tax haven now as you were way back in 1997 when the EU began to tackle this issue. And they're saying they've had enough, and they've told the UK to put it right. And have no doubt about this. The UK is bound to put it right, because it's penalised if it doesn't. I can't see them paying that penalty for you. Well, but that is why all the talk of independence is, I'm sure, re-emerging here from those who want to make sure it is you who will keep on paying to keep the secrecy of the finance industry in this island. Now, I do know that your ministers say that there's a review that's going to happen that might